Hey guys, I've got this image here and I want to take the sky out of the image. So there's a lot of ways that we could do this with channels or selective color, but I'm going to show a way that I use almost primarily in my work, and it's a live, masking solution. So I'm going to first duplicate my layer just as a backup and turn it off, and I'll show you why in a moment. And with our top layer, I'm going to double click it, and in this first box down here you got this blend if gray, and I've never used it before until I discovered this use, and it's brilliant. So we're going to change it to blue, which will just help us isolate the blue values. And if we drag this slider down from the top right, which is affecting this layer, and I'll show you what the underlying layer does in another video, but this slider will key out the brightest blue values, and this one will key out anything that's not blue, the darkest blue values. So we're going to drag this across, and we're going to create a reasonably hard edge along this background mountain, but you can see that it starts to get this cloudy dissolve effect. So we don't want to, it's just sort of, each image will be slightly different, and it depends on how ruthless you want to be with your key, or what is most important to you. And you can see these two chevrons here that are stuck together. If you hold Alt and click on one of them, you can actually drag them apart, so that will feather your mask in your window. But for this, I'll show you another example of using that later, but for this one I want a hard edge, and I'm going to press OK. So we've got this image here, and this is live in the view, in the canvas, without a layer mask. So we can add another layer mask and just get rid of that area. We could do a magic wand selection on these and just fill that with black. And this isn't ever going to be exactly perfect, but it gets you, like, 85–95% of the way there. And now, one of the issues with this is that it's actually keyed out some of the buildings below, which you can't see at the moment. But if we put a layer and fill it, you can see all these areas here that have been keyed out, and that's really bad. We don't want that. So that's why we've got this duplicate layer. So we're going to grab this duplicate layer, turn it on, and just, well, instead of doing that, we create a selection first, and we will then add our mask, and now this layer is going to be filling in those spots underneath our top layer, so it's there. Now, one issue with this layer styles, you'll get this icon here, and this means that if you ever change this image, like if I grade this, it's actually going to change. See, I've graded the image, but it's changing the mask that we have. So if I say raise the black value, you can see that part of the image is actually getting masked away because we're changing the level of the blue, and Photoshop is then recalculating what it's leaving behind. So we don't want that. So if we wanted, we could merge this onto our background layer, and now we have exactly what we want. Sometimes, however, you don't want to necessarily merge your affected layer onto the layers below for whatever reason. So what you can do is just add a blank layer, select the two layers and merge them, and now you have your outfit layer, but it's not merged onto anything else, it's just sitting by itself. So that's super handy if you've, say, put something onto the side of this mountain, but you don't want to necessarily merge it down. Like, I don't know, say you painted some snow in and you've alphaed it out. You don't want to necessarily merge it down onto the mountain, but you want to keep it as a separate layer, so you can add the blank layer on top and merge it together and apply the effect. So I'm going to show you another example, which is with these trees. Trees are a very difficult subject to key out. And this solution is still not perfect, but it gets us pretty well and truly on the way. Especially with this image is obviously a good example, because it's green trees on a blue background. It's not there's not much atmosphere in those trees, so they key out pretty nicely. But if we add another layer behind these trees, actually let's make this layer, let's make it a red color so we can really see it, and let's blend if blue for this top layer. Let's drag it down, and we can see that like 90% of that sky's gone. Now there is the issue of these crunchy edges and the light wrap essentially, and the scattering through the leaves. So in order to get rid of that, we use this feathering. So if we drag these chevrons apart, we can see we're getting this much nicer, smoother key. Now the problem is you don't want to drag these like right apart, because you're going to end up with something mushy that just looks blurry. So the trick here is to keep it sort of mid, like a mid sort of key, so that you're not crunching it in too much. And actually I'm going to leave it about there. And now with these values that are around the edges that are giving them the halo, there's another trick that we have. And if you go to camera raw filter, and this is actually meant for chromatic aberration and such, come across the lens corrections, and we have defringe. So if we zoom in on this and we go to say our purple amount, and we crank this up, it's a very subtle effect, but if I zoom right in on this, you'll see the purple is disappearing. And if I then expand this this slider out, you'll see how it's affecting these trees. Now this isn't exactly what we desire, so the reason is because we want to apply this alpha to this image, so that when we go back in to our camera raw filter, we just want to see these leaves. Alright, so just in here, if we go to our lens corrections and crank the purple amount, you'll see just the most subtle effect occurring through the edges of these leaves. And you don't want to crank it too high, because we also want to extend this out to the blue, and probably maybe keep this at 5, and we're going to go into the green amount as well, but probably even more subtle. And we're probably going to also move the sliders to the right, so we're not sucking out all the green values from this tree. So if we press OK on that and we wait, so now you can see that we've sucked out a lot of the blue haloing that's occurred in here. That's not perfect, but it gets you a hell of a long way towards a nicely keyed image. If we were to put, say, a sky in behind this, you know, that's not too bad. It does lose itself in some of the smaller areas because of the way that the sub-pixel sampling doesn't, there isn't enough data there, but it's pretty good for the for the most part. So yeah, have a play around with that. If we were to grab this and copy it here as just an example of overlaying images. If we go back into our layer styles and we play around with the underlying layer, what this does is says to Photoshop, what parts of this image do we not want to show relative to the underlying layer. So if we say drag this slider across to the middle point, what that's doing is removing the this layer. It's applying a key to this layer, even though this one's on top of the other one. It's taking the values of those buildings underneath and exposing them through this image. So as I move around, the bright values in the layers, all layers below, so it takes everything, not just the one layer, it's your whole image below. So if you change something underneath, like if I paint something, let's just go again with bright red, and as I paint that, it's actually removing the certain parts of the image above. So if I change this to, say, almost full white, it's going through, it's showing up because this layer has been told to not be not show up when the underlying layer is a certain brightness. So this is really cool for doing texturing sort of work. Like say if we inverted this effect and we said show this layer only on the darker values, you can see back here I've got some greens on that mountain, and I'm going to feather this out, not too much, just like that, and now I have greens on the mountain based on the luminance values of that mountain behind, and then I can adjust the luminance values of this image to match whatever's in the background.